obviously everybody's heard of it. Everybody has a pretty good idea of what it is. Marcia, where did it come from? Where did the Enneagram first break into the world? Where are we seeing this?
1916.
Okay, there we go.
1916, 104 years ago, a guy named George Gurdjieff, who was this like spiritual seeker, esoteric type who was looking into different belief systems, not the major religions, but the more secretive kind of Gnostic type things. He did a diagram, a 9-pointed diagram that we would call the Enneagram. That's what it means. It means a 9-pointed diagram. And he claimed that this was like a picture of the universe, that you could fit everything into the Enneagram. All the laws of the universe would fit in this. Everything could fit there. For example, he did a musical scale around the 9 points. He felt it could illustrate everything in reality. All the mathematical laws, all the spiritual laws, everything. He came up with the idea of the law of 3 and the law of 7, and he applied it to the Enneagram. Basically, he was like playing around with it. How do all the different 9 points integrate with each other, or how they all fit together? And he would put things in there to make it, quote unquote, work. It had nothing to do, though, with a type or a personality or anything else that is being taught now. And his followers, he had a follower named Uspensky. Now, Gurdjieff never wrote about the Enneagram, but his follower Uspensky did write about the Enneagram based on what Gurdjieff taught, according to Uspensky. And Uspensky was still talking about it as a spiritual kind of diagram. Now, after that was, he and Gurdjieff both died in the late 1940s. Somewhere around the 1960s or in the 60s, this man named Oscar Ichazo, who had a school in Chile called Arica, and it's in a town called Arica, Chile on the coast, started teaching it. Now, how did he get it? In the research that I was doing, there's no definitive history. And what you find with the Enneagram, which is true for a lot of things from the New Age, you find a lot of different contradictory stories. Yeah, it's really hard to get the facts because all these people give stories. It seems like the most likely was that he ran into some followers of Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff still has followers around the world. There are actually people who are like sort of cult followers of his teachings. And somehow, probably, Ichazo came across this, and he decided to kind of teach it his own way. And so in his little secret occult school in Arica, he was teaching the Enneagram as a picture of ego fixations. So he made each of the 9 points an ego fixation, something you get fixated, your ego gets fixated. Ichazo's view was that your ego, your outward, who you seem to be outwardly, your outward personality and everything, was a cover-up for the real, true, inner, essential self, or the true essence in the self. Your essence is actually pure and untouched by anything bad or anything wrong. So you have this essence in you, but it's been covered up by all of these false ideas you've had about yourself, by the experiences you've gone through, by what other people have told you, by how you've been conditioned. That's the ego, is the false self. This is an idea that's very common in Jungian thinking and in the New Age as well. Even in astrology, I was a professional astrologer. And so the idea is that there's this pure, untouched self. And so that's what he taught. So you find your ego fixation, and when you understand that that's not really you, then you can see this pure self at the center of who you are. So it still wasn't being taught as anything personality-wise or any of the way it's really being taught today. Ichazo had a student at his school named Claudio Naranjo, who was basically, he was a psychiatrist, but he was a spiritual seeker. He went to Ichazo school because he was searching for things. He was searching spiritual truths. After his son had died, he had a crisis and he started this spiritual journey. He learned the Enneagram from Ichazo, and then he took it to a very edgy place in Big Sur, California called Esalen. And it was a very wild place with experimental psychology, people doing hallucinogenic drugs, trying to have spiritual trips with drugs like they did in the 60s, etc. He took it there. He went there around 1970. And he claims in 2 videos on YouTube that he got the types that we now associate with the Enneagram. He got the types via automatic writing. Automatic writing is a form of spirit contact where you open yourself up and you let whatever spirit or entity use your hand to write out things. And he says that's how he got these types. He said partly his observations, but mostly automatic writing. And then he confirmed it through his own observations. So it's very subjective. First of all, it's coming from a spirit, which we know is not not from God.
That's bad news.
These would be fallen angels.
Yeah.
And he had these spirit guides. He and Ichazo both had spirit guides. In fact, Ichazo was very open about these spirits. He talked about Metatron and the Green Ketub were 2 of the big ones. And he said his group was guided by an interior master.
Wow. So
he was into spirit contact, as was Naranjo. And they both also did drugs to have spiritual trips. There's an interesting video where Naranjo talks about his time with Ichazo and talks about Ichazo. It's very revealing about the New Age mindset.
Yeah.
And then he starts teaching it with the types at Esalen, and he has a now there's 2 different stories about how the Jesuits got it, but there was a man, Bob Oakes, who was a Jesuit who learned it from Naranjo, and Naranjo gave him permission to teach it, and Naranjo said that he was the only person he gave permission to. And Bob Oakes took it to a Catholic seminary in Chicago and taught it to some priests there in the seminary. And then it also, Helen Palmer, who called herself a psychic at the time, and I remember when she was a psychic because I was a New Ager, in the late 70s and into all the 1980s, and she was a known figure. She took the Enneagram and started infusing it with her New Age philosophy, and other people picked up on it. And meanwhile, the Jesuit Catholic use of it was being used in a very limited way, like at retreat centers and things like that. It was never approved of or endorsed by the Catholic Church. And in fact, I think they may have actually written something against it, but I can't remember for sure. I know that the Catholic, a Catholic journal, I think it's called the Catholic Reporter, has an article about all these demonic beginnings, the spirit contact and everything. So it was not approved of by the Catholic Church, but these people were teaching it. And some of the Catholics who were also counselors, a few of them did books on it, but most of the books on the Enneagram were New Age books written by New Agers. The book, The Road Back to You, the first Enneagram book published by an evangelical publisher, IVP, came out in 2016. That kind of gave the stamp of approval to the Enneagram. And the 2 authors were Suzanne Stabile, who was mentored for many years by Richard Rohr, and Ian Cron, who's also I would call him a follower of Richard Rohr. They both have taught or spoken at Richard Rohr's center. So basically, they're disciples of Richard Rohr, and they're the ones who wrote the first Enneagram book.
So that Richard Rohr.
There he is again.
That Richard. So, okay. So the 2016 first Enneagram book published on an evangelical Christian publisher. Is that when the sort of explosion of the Enneagram happened in the church, would you say?
Yes, yes, and it wasn't quite an explosion at the beginning. It was
Okay.
kind of out there. The book would be looked at by some people, and you'd hear now and then people giving a talk on it, but it wasn't really popular or taken up. I think the next year when Chris Horritz's book was published, The Sacred Enneagram by Zondervan, that gave
Yes.
the Enneagram another push because here's another publisher. And by the way, here again, Chris Horwitz was mentored by Richard Rohr. So now you have the first two books coming from Richard Rohr's disciples. Now we have over 15, way over, I think we're up to maybe 20 Enneagram books. Two just came out this summer, and September 15th. So it's now it has started really exploding, I would say, around 2018, and then it just took off in 2019. That's when I was trying to keep up with it.
Right.
I couldn't keep up with it.
Right.
I actually first started warning about it on Facebook in 2014.
Wow.
But my first article on the Enneagram, which is on my website, it's called the Enneagram GPS, Gnostic Path to the Self, which I still think is an accurate title. I wrote that in 2011, Alisa.
Wow.
And the reason I wrote it is because that's when I saw it in the Progressive Church.
Wow.
And so I thought, okay, it's in the Progressive Church. That's a little too close for comfort.
Yes.
I need to write about it. And I had been asked about it by a few people. So I did my research and did my article 2011. And I thought, oh, taken care of.
So I'm just going to say this. None of us are perfect in our analysis, and we're all learning as we go, and we're just trying to take everything and compare it with Scripture. But I think that I had, up until this point, viewed the Enneagram largely as something else that's maybe just kind of creeping in everywhere. But I think that you have convinced me that this really is, obviously, it's a new age with occult beginnings and things like that, that is coming in through the Progressive Church, it would seem. It's one way that progressive leaders such as Richard Rohr and Ian Cron and others can get their ideas into the evangelical church and maybe hook some people, because that was always a concern, that so many of these books that you see that are marketed to Christians about the Enneagram are written by progressive Christians, particularly just this incredible influence that Richard Rohr has.